Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Subscribing to My Podcast. Because I have a new guest featured every week, it makes it very difficult to maintain consistent viewership. So if there's one thing that you can do to support me or the guest featured on the show, it's by interacting with my channel in every way that you can. You can always decide to unsubscribe later if you decide that you hate me or my show. With that plugging aside, enjoy my discussion with Jamie Pollard is the athletics director here at Iowa State, serving his 20th year working with us. And hopefully, if you're familiar with Cyclone sports, you'd understand how awesome of a record that is and how well we've been doing, especially recently. So I'm sure there's a lot of excitement revolving around the sports scene. But I had the honor of working with him on a panel, and we were discussing some of the NIL, the name, image, and likeness situations that were happening on campus. And I thought that his perspective was really qualified, first off, as the athletics director, but also really interesting. So I asked him to come on the show and see if we can get to the bottom of some of these issues and maybe some solutions, or maybe just talk about what's going on in the sports world. But Jamie, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and then tell some of the viewers some important things that they should know about you.
Wow, important things that they should know about me. So director of athletics, and been here, as you said, 20 years. I'm originally from the state of Wisconsin, and I grew up as the baby of five. I was a first-generation college student, and only two of my family actually even graduated from high school. So I always liked sharing that background because I'm probably the least likely person to be sitting as a director of athletics, let alone at Iowa State. I went to the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, where I was an accounting major, and I was a student athlete. I ran track and cross country. I ended up working for Arthur Andersen and Company, which most of your listeners probably are too young to know that Arthur Andersen at the time was the world's largest public accounting firm, but then they got caught up in the Enron scandal, and that firm folded as a result of that. I had left long before then.
Nice.
And I ended up getting into college athletics. My first job was at St. Louis University, a Jesuit Catholic school in obviously St. Louis. And then I ended up moving out to the University of Maryland, and then came back home to the state of Wisconsin, was at the University of Wisconsin. And then Greg Joffrey, who was the provost at Maryland when I was at Maryland, became the president at Iowa State. In 2005, he hired me to be the director of athletics here. We have four grown children, two of which are Iowa State employees. One is on our basketball staff, and the other one actually will become a faculty member this fall in the College of Business. And two of my children are married. One of them is getting married this fall, the one that will be a faculty member here. And my youngest will graduate from Northern Iowa this year and just accepted a full-time job working for Coach Jacobson in their basketball office. So.
Wow, it really runs in the family.
Yes. I say I gave my kids the medicine to try to get them not to work in athletics, and the medicine didn't take. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't, and a proud dog owner, so Sebastian, our 4-year-old dog.
Is he an athlete too, or?
He is. If he'd be a basketball player because he's a miniature, but he's not miniature.
Oh, sure.
So my daughter has his sister, and his sister is 14 pounds, and he's 24 pounds. So, he's got, like, I call him Manute Bowl legs. So
Sure.
he's a tall dog for being a miniature dog. So
Right. So destined to get asked if he plays basketball on the street or something like
Correct.
that. So I'm a little curious about what the athletics director position entails. I know that you end up getting a lot of the blame for when all of our sports are doing bad, but also maybe a lot of the praise when all the sports are doing good, hopefully. But what is your actual position? What are you in charge of day to day? And then what are some of these macro things that you're influencing in your position?
I mean, so at a high level, we're a Division I athletics program in the Big 12. We have 275 full-time staff members. We have a little over $100 million budget that has to be fully funded by the athletics department. We're very much an auxiliary enterprise. But so that's the organization in which I work, right? 18 sports. But what I describe my job as is my job is leading leaders. And we could cite many of the leaders that we have in the athletics department. Probably the first that come to mind are Matt Campbell, TJ Otzelberger. but my job is, I'm their boss, right? I don't like using that word, but I'm their teammate. But Matt Campbell reports to me, but you don't want me calling the football plays or choosing who's on the football team. Likewise with basketball, but everybody's got to report to somebody, and Wendy Winterstein doesn't necessarily know everything about athletics either, right? And so you surround yourself with people that know more about that subject than you do, but then you're still responsible for leading them. And so I lead leaders. And so a big part of my job is just, setting the objectives of the department, the goals, kind of steering the ship from afar. But I always like to say, if can't leave the office, if our operation should run just real smoothly, even when I'm not in the office, because that's the mark of a true leader, that you've delegated and put people kind of in the right seats on the bus.
Yeah, and I remember you talking a little bit yesterday in the speech that you gave. You're involved in a lot of the hiring process, but you're also kind of like a public figure. You had said that you're somewhat of a politician when it comes to sports because you have to represent, the teams, the university. I guess, what is that like? What are the challenges with that? Like, how do you kind of walk out of the door knowing that you're going to be, front facing?
Well, number one, it comes with the responsibility of being a public leader, right? You're going to be out in the public, and I happen to work in an industry that most people's interaction with this industry is their hobby or their social time. And a lot of people get very opinionated about sports. And so there's not much that we do that people don't opine about, both positively or negatively. And, it's the old adage that it's never as good or as bad as one thinks it is at any particular moment. I always like to remind people the other side wants to win too. So like if you lose an athletic event, like, our fans are devastated and, they want to point fingers and there must be a reason why. And you just say, well, did you ever stop and think about that when we won? Mm-hmm. Like, the other side was feeling just like we are. So, every time two sports teams play, for the most part, I get it that sometimes some sports have ties. It's a whole other issue. But, there's a winner and there's a loser, right? So, and the other side's trying to win too. So, but it is, you said the word politician. I think back to when I started, one of the cool things that used to take place, it doesn't anymore, but the straw poll. The Republican straw poll took place in Hilton Coliseum. And, I moved to Ames, Iowa, and just from like a historian, like I kind of thought that would be cool to go to. Like, doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. Like it was kind of a political, we were first, the state of Iowa, right? And there was a straw poll. And so I was very interested in kind of like, well, what's that really like? Because you always heard about it, right? Mm-hmm. But I couldn't go near that because if I step foot in there, anybody that's a Democrat's going to assume I'm a Republican, and anybody that's Republican is going to assume way too much about, why I was there, and so those are the things you kind of just always have to be thinking about is you're administering to a group of people that all have different backgrounds, but, the job as athletics director, we have just as many, fans that see it one way as see it another way.
Yeah, and I think that that's somewhat of a stressful position for you to be in. But I imagine that you got to kind of reap the rewards when things go really well. I know that this season was a particularly awesome season for us in regards to football. I guess, like, how do you kind of come off of a season like this, and then how do you interact with the fans, with the people like that? Like, how does that feel for you?
Well, again, using that cliche, it's never as good or as bad, right? Now, when it's good, it's really fun, right? It's, but there are many times it's not, right? And so I think you have to keep perspective, and the more you're in it, the longer you do it, you just get a little more mature about handling the perspective. I would say sometimes the winning doesn't feel as good as the losing hurts. And, the lows are really low and the highs can be really high. And the way to get through it is, can you try to keep yourself in the middle emotionally? And, Coach Otzelberger and I talk about this. I got asked once by one of his recruits, what's the best way you'd describe Coach Otzelberger? And I said, he's relentlessly consistent. And that now is kind of taken on as a mantra in our basketball office. But if you really think about it, all of us strive for consistency in most things we do, right? But to be consistent all the time is really hard. I mean, it takes intention, it takes deliberate. You got to be relentless to be just consistent. And that's kind of their secret sauce over there in basketball is, they're relentlessly consistent. And that kind of, I think, speaks into what you're asking me is, how do you manage the highs and the lows? And it's hard. It's hard. I've always said this, Elijah, is if you cut me, I will bleed. If you punch me, I will bruise. And if you insult me, I will hurt because I'm human. I'm human. And I think sometimes, with the internet and chat rooms and Twitter and Instagram, and we forget that there's people on the other end of, those posts.
Yeah, and I think you've done a really good job of humanizing yourself in the department, but also I think the point you made about the other teams is really important too. You know what I mean? Like every time we go into the stadium, there's another poor team who's about to lose to Iowa State. You know what I mean?
I like how you approach that. Yeah.
And
right.
So like we kind of have to be aware that maybe we were them once too. You know
Correct.
what I mean? In different sports. So I think that's really interesting. I did want to kind of transition into like broader athletics politics, and I know that one of the big conversations happening right now is NIL. Could you kind of explain to the viewers what NIL is if they've never heard of this, and then how it kind of impacts and maybe the conversation that's happening right now?
Well, I think it's important to kind of define it, but then also understand the continuum of, where it came from, where it is, and where it's going. So what NIL stands for is name, image, and likeness. So it's the ability for one to monetize their name, their image, or their likeness. And historically, for competitive reasons, we had said as an organization, the NCAA, that if you were a student athlete, you could not monetize your name, image, and likeness. And the rationale behind it, right or wrong, was fear that people would abuse it. And, lo and behold, that fear was warranted, right? But for years, we didn't. But the challenge when it went to the courts of ultimately, after years of this, was, Elijah, you come to Iowa State, and let's hypothetically say when you were in high school, you had a T-shirt business, and it was lucrative. And when you came to Iowa State and the College of Business found out about that, they said, oh, this kid he should be in an entrepreneurial program. We ought to set him up. We should give him a scholarship. We should help him foster this business because maybe he'll become the next, J. Crew, right? And then along came Jamie Pollard, who was a really good runner. And I had a T-shirt company too. And my company was actually even making more money than yours. And when I came to the NCAA or came to Iowa State, they said, oh, Jamie, you got to shut that down because you can't have one because we're afraid that some donor will buy all your T-shirts just so you get money. And that'd be a violation. And that was the world we lived in. And so the student athletes couldn't use their name, image, and likeness, but a fellow student could go be an influencer with social media, but a student athlete couldn't. And so that law changed. And so when that law changed, we instantly saw why we had the rule, even though I agree that we shouldn't have had the rule, but we couldn't police ourselves. So as soon as we instituted name, image, and likeness, many schools started just instantly going to pay for play, meaning Elijah's a really good basketball player, so this donor is going to give you $500,000 so you come to Iowa State. And we're going to call it name, image, and likeness. And we quickly have gotten out of, we sell sponsorships. I know how hard it is to get Hy-Vee or you name, the entity to invest money in us because they view associating with us is going to help their business. So paying a student athlete in college more money than what they could make as a pro just is illogical, right? But that's what's happening. And so now we're moving to the next tier of that, because for the last 2 to 3 years, name, image, and likeness, when it came on board, we said it can't be run through the school. It has to be run through what they called collectives, so a separate entity. So basically, donors were writing checks to that separate entity. That separate entity would aggregate all those donations, and then they would dole it out to the players based on what the coaches said each player needed to make in order for them to be at Iowa State. And so, in theory, you could only spend what you were able to raise. Okay? For Iowa State, we raised about $5 million on an annual basis in each of the last 2 years to fund those athletes that we needed to pay them in order to get them to come to Iowa State. Then there was a court case called House Hubbard that just is in the process of finally being certified by Judge Wilkins, which says starting July 1st of this summer, each school can provide up to $20 million to student athletes. It's called revenue share. And it has nothing really to do with name, image, and likeness other than it's just the next growth of it. So at Iowa State, we're going from paying $5 million to now having to pay $20 million, and we don't have the $20 million either, right? But if you don't pay it, somebody else will. And so we're seeing that across the country, that institutions, whether they're state or their board or their school, have decided to kind of fund that gap so that they can pay the athletes. And so now we're off to the races where people, if what was $500,000 now is $1.5 million that someone's making, and it is the Wild West.
Yeah, I want to kind of frame this because it seems intuitively good that students are making money, period. Like,
Yep.
it seems like, yes, we want to pay them. But I guess the problem is that now it's just whoever has the most money gets the best athletes. And then that kind of extrapolates to where now there's this huge difference between the richest schools and maybe the schools who don't have that much money.
Right.
Or maybe schools are pulling money from places they shouldn't to fund the football program so they can afford those students.
Right.
I guess, can you lay the groundwork of the future? How can people who are listening to this really grasp why this is more of an issue than it is a benefit? What are some of the implications that have been caused because of this?
Well, I'll give you the real implication is, so Iowa State does not have that $20 million. But if we don't pay it for this coming year, we've got big problems, right? So we're going to pay it. Now, because of tremendous financial discipline and everything we've worked on over the last 20 years, our athletics program had a pretty substantial cash reserve that we built up. And we used that reserve during COVID, so we didn't cost Iowa State, we didn't cost the student body, we didn't cost the Board of Regents a dime to get through COVID. The University of Iowa got a $60 million loan from the university. Athletics program did. Now, they haven't paid a dime of that back yet, but they got a $60 million loan. We did not take a loan. We funded it from our reserve, right? We can't fund the $20 million, in about 2 years, we'll be out of the reserve. So Iowa State University will be faced with an athletics program with a huge annual deficit if it wants to stay in the Big 12 and if it wants to have a P4 athletics program. Now, we can decide we just want to have an athletics program like Northern Iowa, but that's going to have a huge economic impact on the state, on Central Iowa, on the city of Ames, and on this institution. And so that's the problem that we're staring at. And so you started, and I was going to come back and ask you this, you started by saying fundamentally, I'm for the student athletes should be getting paid. Okay. So what if Iowa State says, because Arizona State has put $50 million into the athletics program on an annualized basis. Okay. You picked the program. I can tell you what the number is. Okay. Iowa State's is zero because that's the Board of Regents policy. Okay. So what would you feel as a fellow student if Iowa State did what Virginia Tech just did? Virginia Tech implemented a student fee that's generating close to $20 million a year, and they're going to use that fee to pay their student athletes. So would you pay a bigger fee, Elijah, to go to school here so that a member of our men's basketball team could get paid $1.5 million in addition to their scholarship, their room and board, and all the services that they get as being a student on campus? That's a fundamental question that we're all going to have to ask ourselves, because if we don't do that, then we're going to have, what we're saying is we're not going to have the athletics program that we're having. It's not going to be a matter of whether we win or not. We're going to have to shut the doors, and there won't be 6 football games in Jack Trice Stadium in the fall that has 50,000 people. There'll be 6 games like Northern Iowa has that has a couple thousand people. And so that's the question that we're going to have to answer. And it's a question, quite frankly, other schools are answering today. We've actually got an advantage. We've got about 2 years before we have to answer it. But we're going to have to answer it.
Well, and I think the hard part too is, and this might need a little bit of coaxing from the people who are listening, is that this isn't necessarily just about being into sports or our sports programs. I think, and you will definitely need to kind of clarify this, but sports is such a huge moneymaker for the university, but it also just impacts the state, like you were saying. It impacts academics. It impacts everything about the school. Can you kind of go into the impacts of, like, imagine we just stopped caring about our sports.
Right.
All those people who are like, yay, I didn't really care about sports anyway. I mean, what kind of impacts would we have if we just kind of went to you and I maybe?
Well, I heard this week, and, so I'm citing what I heard, and maybe, as you heard me say last night, be careful if I didn't hear it with my own eyes or see it with my own eyes or hear it with my own ears, right? But in Story County alone, in 2020, when we had COVID and didn't play football, versus 2024 when we had 7 home football games, the tourism revenue was $100 million different. Okay, so right there is a huge economic impact to restaurants, hotels, retail establishments in the Ames marketplace because of what we do, right? And I know, because we have consultants lining up that would love to come in and analyze all of this to help position why the athletics program is a marketing arm of the institution. But they have studies that'll show those schools that have winning football programs tend to attract more males from out of state. And males from out of state students, just by definition, are more profitable to Iowa State University's funding, right? So there's going to be a whole set of issues like that. I saw the economic impact of last year just alone in football. The value of Iowa State's television exposure was almost $200 million. Now, that number seems very abstract, right? It's $200 million. Well, what does that mean? Ultimately, I don't know, but that's $200 million of free advertising. Well, not free, but it's $200 million of advertising that was generated by having the athletics program that does something to position Iowa State University to attract students, to attract research dollars, to attract donations. So those are all things that are going to, that roll into the decision of something of this nature.
Yeah, and I want to get into a little bit of the player base and what these players are experiencing. I think there's already this accusation that colleges spend too much money or care too much about sports and not enough about academics. You could maybe imagine a player who isn't even going to school for, it wouldn't even matter what school you'd went to if you're facing $1 million contract. You could pay me $100,000 and I'd go anywhere you want me to go, you know what I mean? Let alone $1 million.
Right.
So I guess, what kind of impact is this having on our athletes, on the students, and then maybe the academic base?
Well, ultimately we don't know yet because it's still too early. We're living it, right? What I will tell you is historically, and I just came from the athletic council yesterday, where it's made up of faculty members, and there's a faculty committee that looks at our academic studies. And, our student athletes have outperformed the student body on this campus for years. Our grade point average is better. Our cumulative grade point average is better. In just almost every demographic, we exceed the rest of the student body. So the 450 student athletes do better on average than the 30,000 other students on campus. And why? Well, part of that is they're all alphas. They're all very driven. But at the same time, we have invested in making sure academics is a big portion of what our student athletes do. And our student athletes are very involved in the community. I mean, I saw this morning, Rocco, just donated, using his NIL money, he donated entertainment gaming systems to Mary Greeley for all the pediatric rooms. So our student athletes have a long history of community service hours and doing things, but so do other students on campus, right? But my point is just saying we have, as a department, long been very committed to the holistic student. We have a whole unit in our department that deals with mental health and nutrition and all these other different facets besides just sport. So what will be the long-term impact? Time will tell. But the other thing I think we also have to remember is, we're not talking about all the student athletes when we say who's getting paid. It's the football team, it's the men's basketball team, it's the women's basketball team, but, the golfers aren't, the tennis athletes aren't, the track and field athletes aren't, the swimmers aren't, the gymnasts aren't. And so let's not paint with a brush that labels them all as these athletes that are all making that kind of money. But the ones that are, the market is, as you said, if somebody would give you $100,000, you'd go anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And so those athletes are being faced with those, they're being preyed upon. We've got student athletes here on our football team that daily get calls from other schools saying, if you'll transfer, we'll pay you this.
Well, and it seems like there are incentives beyond just payment too. Like if another school is like, hey, we're going to be a little bit looser on your academics if you come here, or hey, we're going to be something like this, like they could lure you in those ways too, on top of the money. So it just seems like allowing students to, like you said, be preyed upon. It opens the doors for a lot of things too, like switching schools. I know that the people were talking about the transfer portal, like there used to be kind of consequences for switching schools so rapidly and quickly. And now those have kind of diminished a little bit in the transfer portal. To me, it seems like there are very obvious impacts of opening up this can of worms, of allowing people to just have a bidding war for students based on athletic performance.
Well, a couple things. I don't think, and I have never heard anybody, get approached by saying they won't have to do more academically. So I hope that's not the case,
Sure.
right? And I would hope that our students would still value that piece of it because it's important. But what you just described about, it's open season and transfers, yes, we used to have restrictions. And then, lawyers took us to court and we lost in the Supreme Court that said we can't restrict them. And everybody thought that was this huge win. The big bad NCAA was trying to restrict trade. Well, we got what we wished for because now we're saying, whoa, they can go anytime they want. That's wrong. Like they should have to sign contract. Well, okay, you just said we couldn't restrict them, and now you're upset that they're unrestricted. And so in a lot of ways, we've gotten what we've sowed.
Yeah, I want to kind of play into the other side of the argument, I guess, would be like the students' rights thing.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like students should be getting paid something. It seems like they should be making money. Is that something that you kind of agree with, that they should be making money based on NIL, but maybe there should be some restrictions or limitations to how much, how it could be done? Or do you think at a base level they should be
here's what
getting
it comes down to, okay? I'm all for the concept of the students are going to get paid, but there's a finite dollar amount, right? So what we're really talking about here is the athletics program used all the money that was generated, and let's call it like it is. It's 75% of it's generated by football, 20% by men's basketball, and the remaining 5% by the 16 other sports, okay? But all the money is spent on the 18 sports. So the football players and the basketball players were subsidizing the opportunities for the golfers, the swimmers, the track athletes. Now what we're saying is the football and basketball players need to keep all their money. Well, when that happens, then that raises the question, do we even have those other opportunities then? Or who pays for them? And so what I would challenge back is let's overlay that on Iowa State's campus. Okay? Which colleges have the biggest donations? I'm going to guess the College of Business. Maybe, we always say architects don't make them, but maybe the engineering. Okay? So should we have L&S? Like, why do we have certain colleges on campus? Well, because we think we want to provide a holistic, full-service approach, right? So is that the right answer? Or should Iowa State just be here for those majors that actually can go out and make money to pay? Let's talk about it. Like, I'm going to go be a psychology major, and I'm going to pay the same amount of money essentially to go to school as the person going in the College of Business. But then I'm going to graduate and I'll be lucky to get a job making what? Let's say I'm going to teach elementary education and I'm going to get a job making $40,000, and the guy or the gal in the business school is going to go to Wall Street and get paid $150,000. So why are we messing around educating teachers? Well, because we feel this sense of responsibility to help all students, all Iowans, get an education. We make the world better, right? And so in theory, that's what I would say we're doing in athletics. We use sport to prepare young men and young women for life after college, right? Just like the group that I was with you last night, you're an RA, and I was at the Residence Hall annual dinner. And you all have learned a lot of life lessons by being an RA and working in housing. And those lessons will help you later in life. And that was what you chose to do, where the person on the track team chose to spend that same amount of time that you're spending as an RA. They just spend it on the track team, right? But you're both getting a extracurricular activity, and both of you will be better in your lives for it, right? But if we took those away from the units that don't make money, is that what we're about? Because that's what's going to happen in college athletics. Because there's going to be, there's a finite amount of money. And when the football and basketball players or the world, the judges, the lawyers say they need to get all that money, okay, then don't complain about what the consequences of that is going to be.
Yeah, well, and I agree, and I think that's a common sentiment. I think that, I don't know if that's readily apparent to a lot of people, but
Correct.
We're seeing the consequences of
Yes.
this now.
Yes.
But I do wonder, you wouldn't advocate for the complete opposite, though. Like, you wouldn't advocate for them making no money based on their name, image, likeness. Would you like to see it just like highly regulated so that students can only make a certain amount? You can't bid past this like reasonable amount of money? Or would you say you would want to go back to the original, which is students don't make any money?
I don't think you can go back to the original, but and you might not be able to go back to what really needs to be, right? But what's happening right now is they're not getting paid for their name, image, and likeness. They're getting paid to play. And under the guise of, we'll pay them like they're professional athletes. They're not. They're still students, right? If they're going to be professional athletes, then Congress needs to step in and give us the same protections that they gave the NFL and the NBA and Major League Baseball, so that when you sign a contract, you have to honor that contract. Right now, we're trying to, the courts are trying to have the best of both worlds. They're saying pay them like athletes, but then no restrictions. Well, you're not going to go get your first job and say, pay me all the money up front because I'm going to force you to do it. And then after you pay me, I'm going to say, I'm transferring. I'm going to go work at your competitor. It doesn't work that way. You signed a contract, then you got to fulfill it, right? But we're being told, well, you can't do that because that would be restricting these poor student athletes. So you can't have it both ways. And so what I would say is, yes, should they be compensated, but they should be compensated at a level that's commensurate with what's reality, not what some donors, got so much money and they want to play NFL owner, but they want to do it with their alma mater, because that's what's happening.
Yeah, and I might challenge you a little bit at the beginning of that, which was getting paid. Like they're not getting paid accurately with their name, image, and likeness. I do wonder, it definitely seems correlational that a really good player is going to make that team a lot of money. So they should get paid a lot of money. But I can also imagine with like Caitlin Clark, for example, I imagine that her success brought a ton of money to the University of Iowa because of like literally her name, image, and likeness. So again, I wouldn't say that it's anywhere near what it is now, but I do think that there is, like, it seems like it would be hard to track, but it seems like Caitlin Clark, because of her name, image, and likeness, made the University of Iowa a ton of money.
No
now,
doubt.
I get that
no doubt. But you're also, so did Warren Buffett, right? But let's not take the outlier. Let's talk about the normal. Okay. So if I told you that, could you name 96 members of our football team?
I don't even know I can name one.
But there's 96 members of our football team that are getting paid, in addition to getting a full scholarship, in addition to getting room, board, books, medical tutors, going to Ireland, okay? And if I told you as a student, you now have to start paying for them to get that, how would you feel, right? And so, we can cite the outlier, but the outlier is not the problem. Okay. The problem is we are not paying what they're worth from a terms of a name, image, and likeness. We're paying what a artificial marketplace is saying we can pay, because we're having donors give money, and then we're saying that that's for their name, image, and likeness, and it's not. It's pay for play, because I just saw the study. I mean, Deloitte has been hired by the Power Four conferences to audit all these new deals. And 80% of all public marketing sponsorship deals are less than $10,000 each. Okay? So when all those athletes I mentioned are making far more than $10,000, you got to scratch your head and say, what's somebody's marketing rights when nobody on this campus could even tell me what their name is or what their number is? Okay. Now I get it. You cite, I'm not going to say her name because it's a hawk, but
Sure.
but you can cite Caitlin Clark. Well, that's an outlier. Okay. That was a one-off.
Yeah. I do wonder if, I guess, correlationally, it's not people that you can name, but they are part of the success of our football team. So like when we have a good season, even though you can't, because Caitlin Clark was famous as an outlier because of literally her face and stuff.
All right.
But I think,
but let's bring George Niang back to this equation, because if George was here, he would say this. Okay, professional athletes don't get free food. Professional athletes have to pay for all their stuff. What we're talking about here is we're paying them and then still giving them a scholarship. Think about this. We're paying somebody $1.5 million, and we're paying their scholarship. We're giving them and they get unlimited meals in the dining hall in the athletics department, yet we give them a check for the value of a 21 meal plan on campus. We give them a check for the value of what it would be if they were the most expensive dorm on campus. We pay all their mental health. We pay all their health care costs. We pay for their academic tutors. We give them all kinds of equipment. And so what employee gets that? I don't get that at Iowa State, right?
Right.
And so that's where it's out of balance. Like it's an emotional, and Iowa State's not the outlier either. I mean, we're just trying to survive. It's happening in other places far greater than Iowa State. So I don't want this to be perceived as Jamie's bashing on what's happening at Iowa State. I'm in it as the AD trying to figure out how we can keep our athletics program doing what it's been doing. Been highly successful. Our student athletes, 10 straight years have set academic records, 98% graduation success rate, meaning that if you fulfilled your eligibility at Iowa State, 98 out of every 100 athletes graduate. Okay. All the community service, we're doing great things, and I want that to be able to continue into the future. But this financial model is going to destroy it, and if we're not careful, it's going to take down Iowa State University with it.
Yeah, what does the future look like? Like, I guess how do you, as an athletics director, maybe push towards solving this problem? But how does like the United States solve this problem?
Correct.
Like, what can we do?
Well, at this level, at the local level at Iowa State, I'm going to make the assumption, and we're going to need to find that out here in the near quick. But I'm going to make the assumption that the power brokers want us to stay in this level of athletic competition. So if we make that assumption, we have to understand that until something happens nationally, we're going to be hemorrhaging money. And so how are we going to fill those gaps? And can we stay in the game long enough until there's either a big market correction or we have to decide we can do it no longer? And so when you say what needs to happen nationally, if I start on the other end of the spectrum, because I just started on this end at Iowa State and say, what can we do? Well, what can happen on the other end is we need some kind of limited protection from Congress so that we stop the lawsuits. Because anything we put in place, we're in a catch-22. The great book from, was it 1980s, Catch-22? Congress says we're not going to help until you prove you can help yourself. And every time we try to help ourselves, we get another lawsuit that makes it even harder to help ourselves. So until we can preempt all those lawsuits, we can't even invoke a rule to try to create a semblance of a framework that's sustainable. So that needs to happen. And then number two is, at some point what's going to happen is institutions can't just keep pouring money into this problem long term. It's not sustainable. And it's going to cost too much to the rest of the campuses, right? And so enough carnage is probably going to have to happen that schools, if there isn't a big correction, a whole host of schools that have competed at this level are going to have to all hold hands and say we're no longer going to compete at that level, and college athletics is going to look different. The answer is somewhere probably in between all of that.
Yeah, and I know it's hard too because from our level, if we start to push back, like you said, we're going to face lawsuits and that's just going to cost us. But beyond that, let's say we successfully pushed back, then all of those schools who have a little bit more money, a little bit more funds, or who aren't willing to push back are just going to keep growing way beyond what we can. So they can just buy our players. They can just do the things that we won't do.
And you're already seeing it.
Yeah.
And I'd say, there's a saying called willing and able, right? And are you willing to try to keep up? And are you able to keep up? And, there's bigger issues in this state than athletics. This is going to be the bell cow because the exposure that we bring to problems, right? But, one of the challenges that Iowa State has is when we compare ourselves to some of our peers is we don't have a board at Iowa State. We have a board of regents, but that's the same board for UNI and Iowa and Iowa State. So let's use this analogy in the corporate world. Iowa State is John Deere. UNI is maybe a little smaller egg company, okay? And Iowa is IBM, okay? Yet all three of those organizations have the same board. That would never work. IBM, John Deere, and whatever we want to call UNI would not have the same board. You'd have your own board so that you can make decisions. The decisions that need to be made at Iowa State are vastly different than need to be made at UNI at Iowa. But you have a board of regents that is trying to do it likewise, keep it the same amongst all three. And so there in itself is a huge challenge that transcends athletics. That challenge is tuition. That challenge is scholarships. That challenge is majors. That challenge is colleges. So, other states don't do it that way. The school has its own board, and that board makes decisions that are in the best interests of that school.
Yeah, to me, it seems like we're kind of in the pit of despair right now. I'm not sure if maybe you can throw a rope or something, but
Well,
what does the way out look like for maybe people who are listening? How can
Yep.
we get engaged, but also just what can we do?
Well, I mean, part of it is, and that's why I'm on the show today, and there's going to be more of this in the near future, is we need to talk about what the problem is. Because if you don't, people can't help you fix a problem if they don't even know it's a problem. And what I know is this: we have about 2 to 2.5 years to get this fixed. And if it doesn't get fixed, then there's going to be hell to pay for a whole bunch of people. Okay. And so in some ways, we have an advantage because other schools didn't have the 2.5 year runway because they didn't use the financial discipline that we've used for the last 20 years to build up a reserve that let us get through COVID, that let us get through conference realignment, and will let us get through about 2 years of this craziness, right? So what I say people can do is, one, they need to listen and educate themselves on what the situation is and be aware of it. Number two is, depending on where they think they are on that issue, is just talk about it. Because this isn't going to be solved by one person in the athletics department. This is going to be something that is going to take from the state all the way down a real thoughtful view of what is the value of athletics at this level at Iowa State to the state of Iowa, to the Board of Regents, and to our institution. And that has to be answered. And based on that answer, then we can maybe have some discussions about possible solutions. I could sit here and throw darts, at the wall of possible solutions. And as soon as you do that, then people just go down that rabbit hole on that particular. We got to decide whether we want to, at a macro level, fix the problem, right? But I know this, if we don't fix it, it won't go away. The University of Arizona had this problem about 2 years ago, and they ended up firing their AD, firing their president, because they had a $75 million deficit. And when they woke up the next morning after firing 2 really good people, they still had the $75 million deficit. And so they ended up having to address the problem at that point in time, right? And so I look at it and go, we got 2 years to figure this out and try to address the problem if we so choose to fix it. The answer might be we don't want to fix it. I hope that's not the case, because I don't think that's the right decision, and selfishly, I think that would be really bad for our state. But if that's the answer, then that's the answer. Then figure out the pathway forward. I don't think that'll be the case. I think too many people care. And I also think that we need to stay in the game. We don't need to be the first one to put up the white flag and say we're out. We need to stay in the game as long as we can stay in the game. And that's why I'm glad that we have the 2 years buildup of reserves, because that'll allow us to stay in the game at least 2 years that we control in athletics. But beyond that, maybe we'll need the regents to allow us to get the loan that Iowa got during COVID so that we can extend it 2 more years and try to figure this out over 4 years.
Well, yeah, and see, that's the hard part too, because a problem like this, it is kind of true that somebody needs to move before everybody else.
Yep.
Somebody has to lose,
Yep.
a lot. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I think, do you think that if a lot of people in a similar situation as us were to start throwing up the white flags, that we would throw up the white flag, even though we have 2 years? It seems like we kind of have to join in to make this movement happen if we're going to.
Right. I ultimately think what will happen is nobody will wave the white flag by choice, but they're going to end up having to wave the white flag because they're just flat out of money. And again, we've got an advantage at Iowa State because we're getting a 2-year grace period. Arizona State's putting $50 million in a year. So by the time we run out, they'll be over $100 million in. Rutgers is $420 some million in. Okay. And I could go down the list of schools. Those are the 2 biggest. But there are schools that, the schools that joined the Big 12, Cincinnati, Houston, they're pouring $20 to $30 million a year into athletics. How long can they do that before it's too much, right? And my intuition tells me at some point the presidents will coalesce around it's too much and we got to take things back. But, where are we with Congress at that point in time, and what does that really mean? Time will tell.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the hard things too is you have to rope in the players who are making millions of dollars. That's going to be a hard sell to tell them that we need to lower some of these contractual obligations. But also you have the schools who can afford this, who are maybe profiting because they have all of the best players. Roping in those people seems like it'd be a difficult task.
But that's where it goes back to, you're not having that issue at Wartburg. You're not having that issue at Simpson. So is that the level college athletics should be at? Maybe if the judges and the lawyers and the court of public opinion nationally is that these players should just get paid like the NFL or like the NBA, well, then that's fine. Then there'll only be there's a reason there's only whatever it is. I don't know if it's 28 NFL teams or 32 NFL teams. Okay, there's a reason there's only 30. There's not 300 and some, right? Okay, and those NFL teams, the Kansas City Chiefs only carry 65 football players, not 105. And the Kansas City Chiefs aren't also paying for a tennis team, a track team, a golf team. The Kansas City Chiefs aren't also paying for all 65 players to go to school and pay the tuition for them to go to school. So there's things that are happening at our holistic approach of college athletics that don't happen in the pros. Yet we want to overlay the payroll piece of the pros onto college athletics. You can't do that and have it be sustainable. It does not work.
What do you have to say for, I guess, the people who have made it this far, the students, just your average Joes?
Yep.
What can they do today, having listened to this, to kind of spread awareness, spread the problem, or even just get engaged or do something to help with this?
Well, one is just, as I said, is, make themselves knowledgeable. Number two, at the point in time that whomever and whatever decides to start throwing the darts at the dartboard and coming up with various possible solutions, is use that background that you educated yourself to understand. Those solutions aren't going to be easy solutions. If they were, we wouldn't even be here. We'd already be doing them, right? So those solutions are going to come with their own set of heartburn. And so that's where I go back to is understanding that there is a problem is the first part of fixing a problem. Then when you go to fix the problem, there's going to be additional heartburn, but you at least understand why you have to do this in order to fix the problem, right? And so, for those students, I would say is to be open-minded to those solutions. I got asked last night, well, why don't we do a student fee like, we did, I got asked at Athletics Council, why don't we do a student fee like Virginia Tech? And, actually Martin asked me that, student body president. And I said, well, I can tell you as your athletics director, I would not want to be on that side of the lobby. To say we're going to charge students more so that we can pay a small segment of our student athletes way too much money, right? I don't think that's the right answer. But, that will probably be an answer that a regent or a state of lawmaker may say, right? And if they say that, that'll be one of the darts on the dartboard that people will have to debate.
Yeah, well, we're running a little bit low on time here, but I want to give you the opportunity to kind of close the episode out. For people who have made it this far, if you want to summarize some of the points you have said or leave them with one lasting message, this is really your opportunity to close this out.
Well, I would just say, first of all, thanks if you've listened in this far, because it was a pretty heavy topic. Number two is don't overreact to it. This is a raw discussion. This isn't, let's not pick one thing I said and now try to, make it be, something bigger than it is. But also I would just say is we've got a lot of great things going at Iowa State. We've got a great athletics program. We've got great fan support. We're the only school in the country for the last 14 years that have averaged over 50,000 fans at football, 12,000 at men's basketball, and 10,000 at women's basketball. No other school in the country can say that. That's pretty cool. So we've got something that's really special here at Iowa State, and I want to see us keep that. Our student athletes go to class. They do really well in the classroom. We have found a way to financially handle, for the last 20 years, we funded our athletics program without having support from the institution or the state, and we've had great success. And those are all wonderful things that we all should take great pride in. And now we're just facing another challenge, and that challenge will be, do we want to continue to do that? And if we want to continue to do that, then we're going to have to accept some hard realities. And I would just ask people to be open-minded to discussions, not decisions, but discussions that need to happen regarding those, whether we want to continue to do this and what is the value to doing it versus the cost to not doing it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Jamie, for coming on and chatting with me about some of these issues.
Sure. Thanks for having me on.